Thank you all so much for joining us here on CPA Academy. This is Jason Bookman speaking, and I'm happy to welcome you into today's webinar on how CPA firms can help clients close books fast and increase cash flow visibility. Today's webinar will be presented by Sachin Sharma of ProcureDesk, and before we get into his presentation, I want to go through a couple of quick technical checks with all of you in the audience to make sure that everybody can see and hear. So if you haven't done so already, head on over to the GoToWebinar questions panel. Let me know that you can see the title slide and that you can hear my voice. And feel free to let us know where you're listening in from. We always like knowing where you are. And this is a great way for us to check that the technology is working. And so far, I'm seeing people checking in from Central Illinois and from really all over the country. So thank you all so much for letting me know that everything's working. And now that we know everything is working, I want to remind you that this questions panel that you are using to check in right now is also there for your webinar questions. If you have any questions for our presenter throughout the webinar, you can go ahead and put those questions in the questions panel. We should have time for a Q&A towards the end of the session, but of course, not all of your questions may get answered on air. Rest assured though, every question that is asked, answered, or not will be forwarded over to Sachin at the end of the webinar. This questions panel is also there for your troubleshooting needs. If anybody is having any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, go ahead and let us know in the questions panel, and I'll get around to all of your troubleshooting as quickly as possible. Now we can move into some quick housekeeping about polls and credit. This is a 1 CPE webinar, and in order to earn that 1 CPE, you need to stay logged in for at least 50 minutes of the time allotted, which is 1 hour, and you need to answer at least you need to answer at least 3 of the 5 total polls that will be offered throughout the webinar. So again, to earn full credit, you need to stay logged in for 50 minutes and answer at least 3 polling questions. When the polls come up, hit the button corresponding with your answer, and then hit the submit button in order to confirm your response, and our team at CPA Academy will get to work on issuing your credit, which will be done by the end of the day today and available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours, and that will be accompanied by access to the webinar handouts and an archived recording of today's webinar. Those handouts are, of course, available also right now over in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Now that we've gotten through all of the housekeeping up front, I'm going to step out of the way and turn things over to our presenter. So Sachin, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jason. So let me turn the webcam on just to say hi so you can see who's behind the voice. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're calling from. Grateful to be here and look forward to sharing my insights and best practices on how CPA firms can close books faster and increase the cash flow visibility for your clients. So to get started, let's kick it off with the agenda. So what you're going to learn today. Here are the key aspects I intend to cover today. One is, of course, how to speed up the whole process for closing the books, especially around the whole purchase to pay process. We'll focus more on the steps which you need to kind of focus on and the areas where you can speed up the process. I'll talk about the A2E framework. This is, I would say my insights into working with different clients and, my experience so far, put it into this framework that kind of we have implemented across hundreds of companies. So I'll share my experience here with you. And that's the framework which we would kind of base the whole presentation around. Then we'll talk about how ProcureDesk technology can help automate that process. And from increasing the cash flow visibility standpoint, as well as the process of closing books. And at the end, I'll share how we can partner together to help your clients to simplify these processes around accounts payable, purchasing, and so on. And we will end the presentation with a Q&A. So a little bit about me, why you should listen to me. I have around 15 plus years of experience in the procurement and AP or accounts payable technology space, mostly working with Fortune 500 small to medium-sized companies, also in helping them understand the maturity of their procure-to-pay processes and what are the areas where they can speed up the process through technology or through process improvement. And I myself have experience running accounts payable teams and procurement teams. So being on both sides, being as a consultant while as running the teams and seeing those issues firsthand. And in my current role, I help ProcureDesk with helping them design a technology solution for small to medium-sized companies around accounts payable and procurement. So a little bit of ProcureDesk overview before we get into the details of the framework. Basically, here are the three areas which ProcureDesk provides. The first is purchasing automation. So if you hear your clients saying, hey, I don't have control over my cash flow. We have too many credit card expenses, or I just have a surprise invoice shows up and now I have to pay the vendor. So I really don't know what's going on till the time I get a credit card report or a invoice. So that is when these are the symptoms when you need to think about purchasing automation and making sure you have a single place for employees to create purchase order requests, as well as the management to review the spending before it actually happens. So that's the purchasing automation. The AP automation is where you speed up the process of processing the invoices faster, hence closing the books faster. So whether it comes to understanding your accruals based on the different milestones, or matching the invoice with the purchase order and figuring out if it is good to pay, rather than routing every invoice for approval. So we'll talk more about that in the later slides, but that's about AP automation. And expense management is for employee expenses, whether it is reimbursable expenses like your out-of-pocket expenses or credit card and so on. All that is handled here. Okay, so moving on. Before we get into more details, time for a poll. So Jason, I'll hand it over to you.
Sounds good. We're going to go ahead and launch poll question number 1, which should now be available for everyone to answer. Go ahead and get your answers in to poll question number 1. Everyone go ahead and get your votes in. Don't forget to hit the submit button, as that is how we will use these polls in order to distribute credit later today once the webinar has concluded. So don't forget to hit that submit button. Poll question number 1 is live, and of course, if anybody has any questions or any trouble with the technology, you can post the questions or your troubleshooting request in the questions panel of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll leave poll number 1 open for about another 15 seconds. Everyone go ahead and get your answers in if you haven't done so already. And we're going to get ready to close this poll out in 3, 2, and 1. That poll is now closed. We'll go ahead and share the results. So it looks like, to the question, what type of clients do you serve? About half the audience is small businesses with less than 10 employees, followed by growing businesses of 10 to 50 employees.
Thank you, Jason. All right, so now we're done with the polls. It's great to see a good mix of all of you there in terms of the clients you serve. So let's talk about the challenges with closing books. What are the key challenges, right? So typical hurdles we see across the board, depending upon the size of the client and so on. One is the receiving invoices from vendors. So typical example here is you don't have a process for capturing supplier invoices. So either the vendors send an invoice through either paper, getting a mail, or sending it to different stakeholders, and then you need to basically spend time collecting the invoices so that those can be processed. So that's challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is having every invoice approved before you basically pay. And that becomes a challenge because if you don't have any pre-authorization of the spend, i.e. no purchase order, then there's no other way for you to know that the invoice is ready to pay. So that means it needs to go for further approval. That means you will be spending time chasing employees and say, hey, Bob, did you approve that? Or can you approve that? And that's a common problem, number 2. Number 3 is spending time on accruing, figuring out what to accrue for. And that could be because the vendor did not send you the invoice, or your clients have large contracts, service-based contracts, which has different milestones, and you really need to know, based on each milestone, what you should be accruing in each month and so on. And of course, time spent on then keying in those bills or invoices in the accounting system. So those are the 4 challenges which we typically see. Now, all that means you have a compliance issue. So if for any reason your invoices are not approved on time or not approved, and you're paying your clients are paying the vendors without any approval, it becomes a compliance challenge. And when I say compliance, it's compliance to your purchasing policies, compliance to if you're if a growing company getting ready for an IPO, you're thinking about SOX controls and so on. So without a process, compliance is a struggle. So my promise today is I'll show you how to make it painless. So let's get into the A2E framework. This is where we're going to talk about all the aspects of how we go about solving these challenges for closing the books on time. So the A2E framework, pretty straightforward. It's authorize, automate, and eliminate. So that's the 2 A's, A2 and E. And basically, if you follow this framework and do all the 3 things, you get almost 50% reduction in the time you spend on processing the invoices. So let's talk about what those 3 elements are of the framework. Authorize is basically pre-authorization of the spending. So having a control in place to ensure that the spend is authorized before the PO is issued to a vendor or an employee use a credit card to purchase the product or service from a vendor. So that's what authorization is about. Automate is automating the process, the matching of the invoices using technology to speed up the process. That's automation is all about. And eliminate is eliminating manual processes for invoices or receiving supplier invoices. And we'll talk about these are some advanced strategies you can leverage for large volume vendors to reduce the time you spend on basically receiving invoices. I'll get into more details of each one of them. So the authorize, as I said, it's authorized spend. So what does it mean, right? So it means having proactive cost controls. It means approving a purchase order request or a purchasing request before the employee actually purchased the product or service. So what does it do for you? A couple of things. One is, and especially in today's economy, where things are uncertain whether we are heading to a recession or almost a recession, depending on whom you ask, a lot of employees are worried about making sure that they're spending money where they need to or control the cost where they can. And that's the biggest benefit now of implementing a control like this, is that the management now have the opportunity to review the spend before it happens and control the cost wherever they can. The second is, now since you have all the information in one single place, it gives you better cash flow visibility. So anytime you want to know what is your committed spend or what is your obligation to the different vendors, you don't have to worry about receiving all the invoices to know all that. You can just look upfront in like an open order report and see all that in one single place. And then the third is, from an invoicing standpoint, now when you receive the invoice from the vendor, since the spend is already pre-authorized, you can also ask for the cost information, i.e. chart of accounts or classes or what project this cost is for. If you're using, I'm using QuickBooks terminology here, you could capture all that up front. So when the invoice comes in, you don't have to worry about spending the time figuring out the accounting codes and so on. So that's what authorization is about. Now, when we talk about automation, so this means reducing the time through procure to pay automation. When I say procure to pay, I am referring to the process of all the steps that are involved from the time someone requests a product or service till the time the vendor is paid, right? And we'll break it down today in all those steps and the challenges in each one of them and how you go about making it more efficient. The second is automating the exception management process. So the biggest challenge, right, with invoices, as I said, is you need to have everything approved. But assume now for a minute you have a purchase order in place and the invoice shows up. Now, if the invoice doesn't match the purchase order, it still needs to be reviewed and approved. So a lot of time is spent on those back and forths, figuring out what to do and so on. So if you have a process that very well defines this, then you basically know if an exception happens, what needs to be done by anybody, and that speeds up the overall process. And of course, as I said, automate to scale, we'll spend more time around that too. Eliminate is doing a couple of things. One is shifting the onus of submitting the invoices to the vendor. So rather than you keying in the data, the vendor key in the data through either a supplier portal or electronic invoicing. And that is that allows you to pretty much completely get rid of invoices wherever possible, because now it's from one system to another system, and invoice automatically goes, right? So there's no need for manual data entry and so on. So that's what we talk about. Eliminate is eliminate wherever you can any manual process and so on. So we talk about these three elements. Now you might be tempted to say, yeah, why do we need all three? Maybe just do authorization and I'll get visibility, or do one of these. So let's talk about that. So if you do authorize and automate, you do get cost control through the authorization process. And you can scale your processes now because you're automating the matching and everything else. And if you do eliminate and automate only, you of course have the efficiency from a scale standpoint, and you of course have the automation to support it, but you don't have cost control then. And if you do authorize and eliminate, you have cost control and efficiency, but you're leaving a lot of money on the table because you don't have processes that can scale. But if you do all three, that's where the magic happens, and you get 50% reduction. So to summarize, the framework is designed in a way that all three pieces kind of support each other. The authorize is the main, I would say, step one. Automation is step two, which follows behind that. And then the efficiency improvement through eliminating the invoices wherever possible and moving the onus back to the vendors. So do all three. With that, there's time for another poll.
All right, we'll go ahead and launch poll question number 2 right now, which should be available for everyone to answer. Go ahead and get your answers into poll question number 2. We will have 3 more polls after this one in our remaining time. And of course, as a reminder, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put those in the questions panel. And if anybody is having any technical difficulties, go ahead and let us know in the questions panel as well. We will leave poll number 2 open for about another 30 seconds or so. Make sure that you all get ample opportunity to vote on this poll. Poll question number 2 is currently live. Everyone go ahead and get your answers in as quickly as you can. Thank you all so much for your participation in this poll and in this webinar. We'll get ready to close out of this poll in just about 10 seconds or so. So go ahead and get your answers in. Don't forget to hit the submit button. The question, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to processing supplier invoices? With that, we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results in 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like 53% of the audience said all of the above, including paper invoices, that every invoice needs approval, and that invoice approvals take a long time.
All right, perfect. So I guess this is a good segue into walking you through now on how do you solve all the challenges we talked about, right? So we'll address it one at a time. So what I'm going to do now, so far I just gave you an introduction to the framework. Now I'm going to walk you through each and every, of course, step in the framework. But more important, my intent here is to leave you with a whole process that you can implement on your own with or without technology automation. So I'm going to get into nitty-gritties here, so bear with me. Now, the first challenge with the having no PO process, which some of you mentioned, 12% of you mentioned here that one of the challenges supply invoices, processing supply invoices is no purchase order. So that, of course, is the problem. But then it also kind of creates some other issues. So when you don't approve don't have an approval process upfront, and I might sound like a broken record that you need to have an approval process, you have a couple of other challenges too along with it. Number one is you have surprise invoices. And I don't remember now how many times I've heard this from our clients, is I get a last minute invoice, it causes issue with the cash flow, we haven't planned for it, we haven't accrued for it. And if you're a small company or you are a venture-backed company with a lot of I would say high burn rate, these things can matter. So that means you're going to either borrowing more money at a higher interest rate or whatever the case might be. And a lot of times it comes at the last minute, right? It has to be paid now, otherwise a critical vendor will shut down the service and sky is going to fall. And those are the two common problems you have, right? Because you don't have a purchase order process. What that leads to is a lot of chaos, including constant back and forth with stakeholders to make sure you have the right coding and so on. And of course, as I said, all invoices must be approved. And nobody can blame accounts payable in this, because AP doesn't know when to approve an invoice. There's nothing there. It's just an invoice. So till the time somebody's stamp on it, basically says, okay, yeah, it's good to pay, you can't do much. And all this is because you don't have pre-authorization of spend, right? It's pretty much money down the drain, and you don't have either. And that kind of talks about other issues too. It's not just with invoice processing, it's also because you don't have control over your spending. What if you can simplify this whole thing by implementing a process so your clients get better visibility from a cash flow standpoint, your team can process the invoices faster, and you control cost by ensuring proper approvals? So to do all those, what you need is to implement the Authorize, right? That's a step one, Authorize spend. So now I'm going to get into the details on how to go about implementing it. So what you need to set up a pre-authorization from a spending standpoint is a purchase approval process. And there are some key aspects after that. So one is you need to have a process whereby your key stakeholders or senior management for your clients can approve, review the purchase before the spend actually happens. So that's number one. So that's the purchase approval process. You need to have your purchase orders in one place, whether it is all your requisitions and you're buying through credit cards, or every time you issue a purchase order, you just need to have in one single place. Now, a lot of times, what we see is that one place is a Google sheet or a spreadsheet that is maintained by somebody, and that's always not up to date, right? Because the information is changing so fast and so on. But at least you need that one place. Now, spreadsheet is a good place to start with. And now, since the purchase order is approved and coded, when the invoice comes in, you basically have all the information you need to process an invoice. So that gets rid of you spending time chasing stakeholders to understand the coding for that PO. So just put it graphically on what the process looks like, right? So the employee creates a PO request. It goes through a approval process, or the purchase order approval process. Depending upon the vendor, you may or may not dispatch the PO or generate a purchase order and send it to the vendor. And it ends with you receiving the material. So the person, let's say, Sally in HR wants a new laptop because they're hiring a new employee. So you create a PO request for that. It goes to Sally's manager for approval. And then once the approval is done, the vendor gets let's say you're buying it from Dell, Dell gets a purchase order, and Dell ships the product, and then Sally goes in and says, yep, I received it, or the new hire confirms that they received the laptop. So that's kind of the process flow from an authorization standpoint. Now, you could, even if a lot of times we get this question is, what if I don't have purchase orders today. Most of our spend is on credit cards. That's fine. Credit card is a method for payment, not your process. So you still can have a purchase request approved, a purchase order generated. You just choose to pay using a credit card. So I think that's the distinction to kind of say. A lot of people think about, oh, I only need a pre-approval and PO process when I have invoices and terms with the vendors. In reality, is you really don't. You can still work it with credit cards. So what do you need to get started? Basically three things. You need a purchasing policy, you need a purchase requisition template, and you need a system or a process to generate the purchase orders. So let's get into all that, what you need. And by the way, at the end, I'm going to share a couple of links where you can go and download a template for both purchasing policy and purchase requisition template. So if you want to just kind of get started with something with your clients, we got you covered. So use that to start with. So what to cover in purchasing policy, though? One is overview of the process. So think about this way: if a new employee joins an organization, how do they know how and when to purchase? That is where the purchasing process comes in. It's as simple as, if you need to buy something, here's the process you need to follow. Then second is who needs to approve. And this is where I'll spend some time here, where we see a very common issue especially with small companies, where owners want to review everything. The problem is what you're trying to do, right? Because if they approve everything, then they become the bottleneck pretty quickly. And that means rather than now, you're chasing them all the time and getting something approved. What we rather say is use Pareto, do an 80-20 on your transactions, and focus on only 20% for management review, because that 20% usually is higher threshold items and they control 80% of the spend. And that solves for controlling spend as well as making sure you have oversight on the spend and so on. And we also encourage having some level of self-approvals. So let's say if an employee needs to buy an office supplies, they don't need to get an approval for a $50 paper or something like that, right? So set the limit in a way that it enables the employees rather than just create another bottleneck. And the third thing is how to submit a request for purchase. So that could be, okay, send an email, or you have a purchasing system like ProcureDesk, or you can use Google Forms, paper forms. We have seen that all, but it's important to have something to start with. And then in the requisition template, so let's talk more about that here. So what you should cover in a requisition template. So one, the obvious thing, the person who's requesting the purchase, why they're buying it, whether, okay, is it just an office supplies, or if your clients have customer projects for which they need to do purchasing and so on, then you want to book the cost to the right project. So that information needs to be captured. What are they buying? You're buying a laptop, buying a consulting service, what that is, right? And the amount, so you can figure out the right approval process, and the payment method. So in case if a check needs to be cut, or even for that matter, a lot of times what we see is if you issue a purchase order and the employee lands up paying through a credit card, the vendor might send you the receipt, which looks like exactly the invoice. They might have something like paid there, sometimes don't. And you might land up processing that invoice twice. So one, you paid through a credit card and you might issue a check. You can avoid things like that by making sure that you have a payment method on file or on the purchase request, so you know how you're going to pay, and then you can compare it to. So that's the purchase requisition. So far what we covered is the process for authorization of the spend. So just going back here one more time, you need a purchasing policy, make sure everything is documented from a policy standpoint. You need a requisition template or some sort of form to get it started. And third is you need a process to generate the purchase order. It could be as simple as going to your accounting system like QuickBooks, or if you use a system like ProcureDesk, we automatically generate the purchase order and so on. So absolutely can be fully automated there. With that said, time for another poll.
Sounds good. We're going to go ahead and launch poll number 3. So go ahead and get your answers in as quickly as you are able. Question: what percentage of your clients use a purchase order process? Is it less than 10, 10 to 30, more than 30, or no purchase orders at all? Go ahead and get your answers in as quickly as you can. We'll leave this poll open for about a minute total. So get your responses in, and don't forget to hit that submit button for this poll to count towards your CPE. Poll number 3 is live, and we will have 2 more polls after this one. We're going to leave this up for about another 15 to 20 seconds or so. Everyone, please make sure that you get your answers in as quickly as you are able. And once again, don't forget to hit that submit button. And of course, once again, a reminder that if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and put those questions in the GoToWebinar questions panel. We'll get ready to close out of this poll and share the results in 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like 38% of the audience says less than 10% of their clients use a purchase order process.
That's great. So hopefully what I've shared so far will help you speed up that or increase that number on the percentage of purchase orders that are being generated, because that's going to help you in the next step, which I'm going to talk about. So far we talked about authorization of the spend. So that means you issued, you've gotten a request approved. You may or may not issue a purchase order. If you have, then you receive that purchase order. So those are the 3 steps. Now comes the fun part, is where you spend most of your time, is matching the invoice. So if you have a bookkeeping service, or you're kind of helping your client set up accounts payable process, I think this is the area where which will help with speeding up the invoicing. Now, you got a PO, which is great, better than nothing, right? You at least have cash flow visibility, and your client can control costs and so on. And it does reduce time on coding, because you can actually see a PO has been created and the codes are there. You just copy it from there. Or if you're using an accounting system, like a lot of these accounting systems like QuickBooks or Xero, you can just copy it from the PO itself. But a question still remains is, okay, is it good to pay? So if going back to the previous example, if Sally orders a laptop, has Sally received the laptop, or how do I know, right? So that becomes a challenge. And then of course you get back into the same constant back and forth. This time not in terms of approving the invoice, but more in terms of, hey, did you receive it? Should I go ahead and issue a payment to the vendor based on the payment terms and so on. And in some cases, for some unlucky ones, the client kind of gives you a box of receipts or a package of receipts and say, hey, these are all the delivery receipts we got so far. Go figure it out and do a 3-way match. A 3-way match is basically where you're matching all the information between a purchase order, a receipt, and an invoice. So how do you go about solving that? So, first of all that's happening is because you don't have a way to perform the 3-way match. You may be not doing the 3-way match or 2-way match of the invoices and so on. Now, imagine if you can automate the invoice matching process so you don't have to chase employees, right? Imagine invoice coming in, so it gets matched to the PO, it checks for missing receipts and so on. And it also, if the invoice is matched, then how you can automate the creation of the bills in the accounting system so you don't have to do it again, like QuickBooks. And how do you basically, if you can reduce the time by more than 50% or up to 50%, it opens up opportunity for you to serve more clients with the same headcount, or open up opportunities for more strategic conversations with your clients, and not just about processing invoices, but also with business planning and so on. So here is the process, and this you can automate using technology, or you implement a manual process, some sort of process which kind of follows these steps. That will greatly help you with the reduction in the time. So first is to automate the 3-way match, right? Automation wherever possible, but the 3-way match, the way I would say is, take this example of the same laptop. Let's say you order a laptop for $1,000. So one laptop for $1,000, that's on the PO. And the invoice shows up for the same, one laptop for $1,000. And there's a receipt or a goods receipt note which has been created or received from the vendor for the same one item. So you matched all the quantity, you match the invoice amount, and if everything matches, you say this is good to approve. So basically what you're doing is if the three-way match is perfect and everything matches out, you really don't need to send that invoice for further approval. So let me say it again. We basically need to make sure that if the matching is happening and the match is perfect, you don't need to send it for approval. And now the same thing you do with the two-way match is, let's say you order some consulting services and the vendor sends the first invoice. Now, how do you know whether the vendor performed the service the way your client wanted it and so on? So you do send it for like we call it a review process. So it's not really an approval to pay, it's more for confirming whether you receive the service or not. So it doesn't go to the same person who has the authorization from a spending standpoint, it goes to the person who requested it. Now, every time you match it, not everything is going to match automatically, so you need to define a process, a workflow process to route those invoices for approval if there's an exception. So you basically automate, and if it is perfect match, you don't need approvals. If it is not a perfect match, you route it for further approval. And with any approval request, you definitely need reminders because people forget. So here, with technology, of course, you can automate all that. But if there is no technology, you still can have a process where every week you may be reviewing all the requests that has gone out and sending reminders to the different stakeholders. And of course, creating those bills in the accounting system. So if you have automation that can completely automate it for you. For example, with ProcureDesk, most of our clients, when they use the three-way match, if the match is perfect, the system automatically creates the bill without any further touching any accounting system. So from putting just a graphical view about it, you have a purchase order, you have a receipt and invoice, and if everything matches, that's your perfect three-way match. So what do you need to implement a invoice matching process? First, of course, your vendors must have a purchase order number on the invoice, otherwise you don't know where to match it to. So that's pretty obvious. You standardize the invoice capture process, so the invoices come in one single place rather than you trying to gather those invoices from different stakeholders, and investment in technology for automation of the workflow. Otherwise, you still get benefits if you have a manual process. Automation always helps. Here's an example. You have an invoice, you have a PO number on it, you can match it. Now, there are a couple of ways to, I would say, incentivize or threaten, whatever word you want to choose. There's a no PO, no pay policy. You can enforce it with your vendors and say, if you don't have a PO, I'm not going to pay that invoice. You can put it in your contracts, you can put it on your PO templates, so that when the purchase order goes out, it's very clear, what to expect. You can add these instructions on the PO template, right, as I said, and you can reinforce the message to your stakeholders. That could be your purchasing team, that could be your, in smaller organization, it's the business department owners who are working directly with the vendors and so on. Now, standardizing the invoice capture process, if you already have an accounts payable email where you're getting the invoices, yeah, that's fine. But what happens is you have the same mailbox where there's a lot of noise in that mailbox, right? You're getting new invoices, you're getting requests for, payment requests and so on. Hey, whether I receive when I will receive the payment and so on. Rather than that, we basically recommend you set up a new email, something simple as invoices at whatever the company name.com. And the idea is you have a separate box for tracking it. So tomorrow, if you need to hook it up with the accounts payable software, it's just easy for that software to actually pick up all the invoices and process it for you. And you can avoid data entry in this case. Add that email on the purchase order itself so that the vendors know where to send it. Of course, inform stakeholders that if you get an invoice from the vendor, just route it to this email. So those are the ways you can capture the invoices faster by standardizing it to one single email. Here's an example where it's a PO template. In the middle, you can see there's a bill to instructions. There's an email where it needs to go to, and a note which says, hey, please note all paper invoices will be rejected. All invoices must have a purchase order number. So you could just do something as simple as this to make sure that the vendors understand the process. So here, just to summarize, from a automation of the workflow standpoint, you have a centralized invoice capture process that could be just as simple as setting up an email. You automate the invoice matching process so that you're not spending time matching each and every invoice, and only send the exception invoices for approval. And third piece is integration with the accounting system to make sure that once it is matched and it's ready to pay, you route that invoice to the accounting system without any manual intervention. So those are the three aspects of the second A in the A2E framework, which is automate. With that, time for another poll.
All right, this will be the fourth poll. We will have one more after this one, 5 polls total. And poll question number 4 should be available for everyone to answer now. Go ahead and get your answers in to poll question number 4. The question, what is your current process for approving supplier invoices? Get your answers in. Don't forget to hit that submit button in order for the poll to count towards your credit. We're going to leave this up for about another 30 seconds or so. So please make sure that you get your answers in as quickly as you are able. Again, this is poll number 4. We will have one more poll after this one. Thank you, everybody, for your responses to this poll question. We're going to leave this up for about another 15 seconds. About another 10 seconds or so. Don't forget to hit that submit button in order to register this poll for your credit. We're going to close out in 3, 2, and 1. And here is how you all voted. It looks like 30% of you said emails, followed by 29% saying none of the above. 34% use manual paper-based approval processes.
Well, that's interesting mix of I'd say typically what we normally see. Alrighty, so far we covered the 2 A's of the framework. Now let's go to the E, the A2E, the eliminate, the invoice documents. Now this is a little advanced strategy of how you reduce the, I would say, the number of invoices basically. So invoice capturing is challenging, right? Suppliers are sending invoices to different stakeholders, paper invoices, as most of you said, and data entry takes time. And all this is because suppliers will do what is convenient, and they will, if you don't tell them your process, they will follow their process. So I'll say it again, you need to tell your suppliers your process for receiving the invoices, otherwise they will follow their process for sending the invoices. So what if you can completely eliminate invoice data entry, automate the matching process, and free up time to focus on strategic discussions with your clients? So here's where e-invoicing comes to rescue. Now, when we talk about e-invoicing, it's basically the way it works is there are large vendors like your Amazons of the world, the CDWs of the world. They have vendor technology where they can actually send the invoice in an electronic format using common industry standards like CXML or EDI to a accounts payable software. Now, you definitely need a technology for that. You cannot do this manually because it's a system-to-system invoice. So the vendor sends the invoice electronically. The receiving system, in this case, your client's accounts payable software, receive it. It understands for which PO it is for. It automatically matches it. And if it all match, invoice is automatically sent to the accounting system for payment. And if it doesn't match, it flags it out and you route it for approval. Now, to do that, prerequisites are it's only supported by large companies. So you want to focus only on those vendors that has a large number of invoices, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, because it needs infrastructure to support it and so on. And you need a client need to have AP technology or accounts payable automation technology to capture that invoice. Our experience so far, we have seen 30 to 40% adoption rate. So if you are processing like 1,000 invoices a month, you can probably automate up to 300, 400 invoices like that, because you always have small vendors who don't have this technology and so on. So this is not for everybody, but at least 30 to 40% of your base. Here's what a typical workflow looks like with e-invoicing. The supplier submits the invoice using the system. The invoice is received by the accounting system and does the matching and everything else. And then once it is matched, it gets routed for any further approvals if needed. Otherwise, it goes to an accounting system or a bill payment system like bill.com for payment and so on. And time for the last poll, I guess.
All right, we're going to go ahead and launch the 5th and final poll question, which should be available for everyone to answer right now. Again, this is poll number 5. Go ahead and get your answers in as quickly as you can. The question: how would you rate the efficiency of your client's procure to pay process? Go ahead and get your answers in. We will leave this open for about another 40 seconds, 45 seconds or so. Don't forget to get your answers in, and don't forget to hit that submit button to confirm your response. And if anybody does have any questions, you can go ahead and put those questions in the GoToWebinar questions panel. That's the same questions panel that you used to check in earlier at the beginning of the webinar. We're going to leave this up for about another 15 seconds or so. Go ahead and get your answers in, and once again, don't forget to hit that submit button. This is the 5th and final poll and the final opportunity to answer a poll for your CPE credit. We're going to get ready to close out of this poll in 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like 34% of you said somewhat automated but needs improvement, followed by none of the above. And then 26% of you said manual and no automation.
All right, perfect. So with that, I'll show you, I'll spend 5 minutes to show you the technology piece in terms of how the technology can really connect all of this together. So at this time, you should be seeing my screen. This is basically what I was talking about, that the first A is the authorization of the spend, and where a approval is required before a spend can actually happen. So just really logging back. So here is an example of that, where John requested a purchase for, let's say, paper in this case, a printer for resale and so on. It went to Mark for approval, and after Mark approved it, the vendor submitted an invoice and so on, right? So it's just all in one kind of single place. Now we make it easy, very easy for the employees to create purchase requests. Let's say we'll take Amazon example. You basically go into click on it. It's as simple as click on a link like that, pick what you want to buy, and add it to the cart. So no difference there. But instead of buying directly, you just click on this button, and it automatically takes the data from a vendor's website like Amazon, puts it back into the system for the employee to then request it. So you get the best of both worlds. The employees gets the best experience, and you can here now get an approval. So now I can just say, hey, this is for office expenses. Maybe I need a new monitor, whatever the case is. We're going to pay the vendor through ACH. We have chart of accounts available here, which comes from the accounting system. And we have things like project codes, so you can book the cost with the right project, right class, and so on. You can support budgets. So here you can enable, let's say this is coming from my IT supplies budget, and so on. And then it kind of goes from an approval standpoint, goes to whomsoever you want it out for approval. So this could be one person, multiple people, whatever the case might be. And you just submit it for approval, and then the system sends a email for approval. And this is where the cost control comes into picture, that now you can review and approve the expenses before it happens. Now you could do this from your mobile app. We do have a mobile app for that. You can do it from your email, or I can just review it here, check the budget, how much of the budget is currently used, what's available. So you can implement, you can approve with the confidence, right, that you have money to spend. So if I just want to approve it, and this is as simple as this. And now once that is done, the system sends an email to the requester, automatically notifying it. So there is no need for sending emails and say, hey, your request has been approved, and the system automatically send it to the supplier, generates a purchase order. It's all that is done for you. And of course, it syncs the invoice with, in this case, purchase order with QuickBooks. So that's the PO process. Now, when the invoice comes in, we automatically import the invoices from different emails. Suppliers can submit their own invoices and so on. But a simple way to upload an invoice in the system is just going here and let's say I upload a Amazon invoice here, and then the system checks for supplier name and so on, matches with the PO. In this case, I'm just saying, hey, this is for Amazon, and the system says, hey, you got a bunch of open POs, which one it is for. So this is the three-way match I was talking about into A2E framework. Is now you have an invoice and you have received that invoice from the vendor and so on, and all you want to do now is submit it for matching. And when you submit it for matching, the system matches everything for you. So in this case, it matched the ordered quantity, the received quantity, invoice quantity. And if it found an issue, it said, hey, I don't have a receipt in the system. So now this user automatically kind of gets an email and saying, hey, you need to create a receipt. And once you create a receipt, which is nothing but confirming that you have received the product, or attach any packaging slip, take a picture from your phone, you can do all that and just create a receipt. And once that is done, it does a couple of things. If I go back to my PO, it's delivered now, as you can see from the status standpoint. And the invoice is also matched and integrated with the accounting system. So this is all done automatically for you if you're using systems like QuickBooks, Xero, Sage Intacct, NetSuite, and so on. And the third thing is the cash flow visibility. So now you get all this in one single place, right? In terms of overall spending, what you're buying, from whom are you buying, who's buying, where the cost is booked from a GL standpoint, where how are you paying your vendors from a payment terms perspective. The monthly spend trend, this is common, this is very important for if you're a startup, right? You want to know what your burn rate looks like from month to month perspective, who's spending money within different departments, and budget-wise, you can see overall consumed budget by department and so on. And then from your closing the books perspective, right, there are different reports which gives you everything you need to know to close books on time. This is a very common report. It's called Open Order Report. It gives you the information on what's the total ordered amount, what's total invoice, what's balance to be invoiced, and so on. So all that brings it all together. And of course, you have reports like things that is, for example, if I want to know anything that is received but not invoiced, where I'm missing an invoice and so on, and need to accrue for it, all that can be automated here. So it just brings it all together in one single place. So with that, I will move back to the presentation. So a couple of things. As said, since you guys are awesome, here's the free templates we talked about in the handout. If you click on the link, it will take you to 2 templates. And these are Word templates you can download and modify it to get started with, the purchasing template and the requisition template. If you have any issues with it, just reach back out to me. And now we talked about in the beginning in terms of how do we take it to next level, and I'll talk about how technology can, how we can kind of use technology to speed up the process, right? You absolutely can implement the A2E framework manually. Take the policy templates I gave you, take the requisition templates, put it in a Google form, you're good to go. But typically the process doesn't scale, especially for as the client grows, number of POs increase, number of invoices increase, and so on. And that is where we have a partner program for CPA firms like you. In the partnership program, we help your clients implement a best-in-class procure-to-pay system. Of course, it reduces the burden on you because technology takes care of automating most of the process for you. And we have special bonuses that is only reserved for partners. So we'll talk about that now. We, of course, get a special pricing. And in the end, I'll talk about how you can reach out and get started. It's a discounted pricing for partners. We do offer a white glove support. So typically, most of the times, you probably had to worry about, oh, I need to implement this new system. We take care of that for your clients. It's typically a $2,000 value. We throw in for free for our partners. You get early access to new features, and you get to collaborate with our product management team for new features, and we take your feedback and provide feedback on what we are working on and so on. So we only have 15 space for our clients, partners. So we're working to onboard 15 new partners in the next, I would say, quarter or so. So to become a partner, if you're interested and you want to discuss the opportunity, is as simple as going to ProcureDesk.com, clicking on this link here. So for example, here, just fill in this form, some basic details, and so on. And somebody from our team will reach out to you to get it started. It's as simple as this. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on this email. My email is here. I have added some links to free guides which you can use. So if you're advising some clients around strategic savings, especially this time, like how do you do cost control? And if you're a fractional CFO, this is a good guide. So if you go to resources, you can download this for free. We also have a guide for purchasing practices. So what best purchasing practices you can implement to save 5 to 8% on your purchasing costs. So that's there too. And if you're just thinking about, hey, we probably should invest in procure-to-pay technology, but we really don't know the business case around it, there's a template which you can just download and fill it. It's a simple spreadsheet. So I'll end with these 3 resources. So again, thank you for joining, and we'll now leave some time for Q&A. Jason, back to you.
Sounds good. We only have time for a couple of questions, but I see a couple of good ones came in from the audience. Somebody asked, what if their clients only use credit cards? Can you still use a purchase and invoice automation?
You absolutely can. I mean, of course, not much on the invoicing side, but definitely on the purchase order side. And the way you do that is you implement a requisition process where your employees go in and create a purchase request. And at the time of creating the purchase request, you're asking the employee to identify what credit card they're going to use. So you still have, I would say, pre-authorization of the spend, but payment is done through a credit card. Now, you probably had to follow up with a different process afterwards. So in this case, there's no invoice. You have an expense receipt. So you use expense reporting for matching it to respective spending and then approve the expense report.
All right, somebody in the audience asked if this technology is good for not-for-profit companies.
Absolutely, and I think non-for-profit companies have, I would say, the most need for things like that. We have a lot of non-for-profit clients, and one of the typical requirement, if they have like a grant or federal funding, is to have approval processes in place. And most of the times what we see is they have highly manual paper processes. And that's where we help them with automating the whole purchasing policy per se, putting together a requisition process, and providing that visibility up front, and I would say transparency back to the different organizations.
All right, I think this will be our last question. Somebody asked if the process works for companies that purchase a lot of services.
It absolutely works. And for a services perspective, a lot of times people think about, oh, we probably don't need a purchase order process. Actually, you do need a purchase order process. You can use a blanket purchase order process for that, or at least use a process where the employees are upfront defining the different milestones. So the challenge you're going to have with services is you don't know what to accrue for if the service is performed over a period of time. So let's say you are a biotech company and you have a outsourced contracting like for research services and so on. You probably need to identify all the milestones up front, and that is where the PO process helps, that each milestone can be defined so that when you look at what is invoiced and what is pending to be invoiced, you can use the milestone dates to accrue for the expenses. So absolutely, this process works for both tangible materials as well as services.
All right, and with that, we are the tail end of our time. Sachin, do you have any quick concluding remarks for the audience before we go ahead and close out?
No, I just want to say, thank you one more time. And if you are interested in seeing, how we can partner together, just go to the ProcureDesk.com, click on the partners link, fill up the form, and we can take it from there.
All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and get ready to close out of this webinar. CPE will be issued by the end of the day today, and that will be available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 hours, along with access to an archived copy of today's webinar and a copy of the handouts. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up session. Thank you so much for an informative presentation. And to all of you in the audience, thank you so much for your participation and attendance. We hope to see you all on a future webinar, and have a great rest of the day.